Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. A lot of you by now have heard about this so-called all-whites-only town that's being set up by a bunch of yahoos in Arkansas. For those of you who may not have heard, the log line is this: a far-right ethno-nationalist group has set up a whites-only community in a remote part of the Ozarks in northeastern Arkansas. Arkansas. That's Mike Huckabee's demented little daughter's state. She's the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Man, that sounds like a bunch of inbreds names. And this heifer claims to be against anything racially divisive. That's what she was running on. That's what she's declared. Oh, I don't want to have anything racially divisive now. You know, she hates things like books that tell the truth about slavery. That's divisive. But meanwhile, you got these white supremacists who are setting up their own little demented petting zoo in her state. And she's been completely quiet on this while it's been making international headlines. So what does that tell you? As far as she's concerned, apparently this is the kind of divisive stuff she likes. Now, of course, the very first thing that people point out is this is blatantly violating federal law, especially when it comes to housing discrimination, but that's where these guys think that they're being slick. Now, the legal rationale that they're claiming, and I put legal in quotes, is that what they're doing shouldn't fall under housing law at all because they've done what they're calling a private membership association, or a PMA, for individuals with, quote, traditional views and European ancestry. This is basically a clumsy front for the old racial covenants. That's what they were doing prior to the 1960s when they outlawed that kind of housing discrimination. You had the racial covenants. You can't live in these areas unless you're white. At the very least, you cannot be black and live in these areas. This is what these PMAs are based on. The old racial covenants. And yes, the people who are purporting this stuff, they all look like a bunch of extras from the movie Deliverance. Now, what they're claiming is that they're doing this because they're opposed to mass immigration, multiculturalism, and what they call forced integration. Based on what I've seen, though, what they're actually opposed to is soap, water, and not being able to have sex with one's blood relatives. And these guys are talking about all the folksy stuff that they plan to do as they try to literally relive the 18th century. Oh, we're going to be building a school and such. Give me a break. These are hillbillies. Arkansas up there in the Ozarks, and they got aspirations to try to set up another little nest somewhere in the Appalachians. These are the prototypical illiterates. The only two words they know are incest. And if these are the people planning to start schools, one thing's for sure, they won't be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, or hygiene. And given these guys' track record, it's only a matter of time before they inevitably have their first school shooting. That train's never late. And if what they thought was going to happen was that all of those folks who were in the suburbs were going to suddenly want to flee from there so they could go live rough out in the middle of the woods, well, looks like it's not turning out quite like that. They're already having to do crowdfundings for, get this, to try to encourage people to have children there. Now, what do you call it whenever you have somebody who you got to give them money for having children? What do you call that? You call that welfare. So one thing's for sure, the white supremacists are continuing their tradition of having somebody else foot the bill for their kids. And what that means is they didn't have their funding in place when they pulled this stunt. But I hear Elon Musk has more money than sense, so who knows? Maybe he'll throw these inbreds a few $1 million into their money pit. And they got some little corny name for it, like Return to the Land or something. I'm thinking to myself, well, if you guys were going to come up with a name for this place, after all, they're talking about starting their own white nation. Well, you got Baltimore, Maryland, a state like Maryland. In their case, they could call their state Mayo Land. I really can't believe that they missed that opportunity. Now, of course, I'm enjoying dunking on these clowns because they deserve it, but there are some serious points that do need to be made. Now, obviously, these creeps are not just trying to get themselves some attention, though that is important to them. There are two reasons for what they're doing. One, they've said that they want to expand into other areas. And two, as their leader said, you want a white nation? It can be done. Well, 150 acres is not a white nation and only qualifies as a white village, not even a white town. It seems that the devil must be in charge of urban development around there. We've seen these half-brained attempts at these nutbag survivalist compounds before. The White Aryan Resistance did it in the 70s and 80s. Randy Weaver, Cliven Bundy, David Koresh. There's plenty of these creeps who want to try to go out in the middle of nowhere and try to make up some sort of all-white getaway. And they always end up the same way, with them inevitably provoking some standoff with the law enforcement and killing everybody around them. What's true for the individual is true for the group. These people are inherently unstable because white supremacy is unstable. It's constantly resorting to tricks and scams, trying to convince everyone that it's going to stand forever. But as soon as people try to quarantine it, they show their true colors. You see, I don't really have much of a problem with these idiots deciding that they're going to have their little white supremacist theme park, just so long as they never come out of it. These people aren't looking for peace or safety because white supremacists don't want peace. This guy says he wants to relive the 17th century. Well, in his case, he might want to actually read a book about what happened to his ancestors because those guys wound up dying of famine, starving. They got all sick, abandoned their little hovels that they came up with. They didn't last very long without us to support them. They didn't last very long without us to actually be here to make sure that they didn't die. What's much more likely to happen, though, is that this guy and his friends are going to wind up reliving the 20th century. Because without black people to attack, these white supremacists will do what their ancestors did 100 years ago. Turn on each other, which is what they were doing in Europe for 1,000 years. They always try to claim that they just want to live alone in their perfect white lifestyle. But the white supremacists inevitably show everyone why they started most of the wars in history and the two largest wars of all time. Now, putting the finer points of housing law and discrimination law aside, I would personally have no problem with these guys having their own little white supremacist outdoor zoo, so long as they stayed there and didn't come out. But the problem is they've already made it clear that as far as they're concerned, they intend to expand this little white supremacist colonization project. And that is a problem. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment. Power tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. There's absolutely nobody in their right mind who's going to want to go run off to that flea-bitten zoo that these guys are calling their little white nation. Nobody's trying to get in there who has any sense. But the problem is they've already made it clear they intend to get out of there first chance they get. And what that means is they're going to be trying to find a way to get some sort of funding either from sufficiently wealthy private individuals or, on a long enough timeline, they'll be asking the Sarah Huckabees of this world to see if they can float them some money or get some state laws passed in Arkansas or Missouri that will allow them to have some sort of special dispensation for these kind of projects. These white supremacists are always looking for a handout. That's what white supremacy is based on. But the main thing that these guys want is violence. They want to be able to carry that out. That's what this is actually about. Violence without fear of punishment. That's what motivates these white supremacists to do anything. The idea is to mark out something that they're going to call their territory, and then they'll be running around outside of it. And you can bet that these scumbags are going to be running around, lurking, waiting in ambush to see if there's any black people who might be coming by on whatever highways or avenues or roads that are going to be in the area, because that's what this is really about for them, is to be setting up their little racial ambushes. Because they intend to be running around, shooting at any victims that they see coming through the area, and then they're going to immediately slither back into their little sundown town, where they know that the local authorities aren't going to prosecute them. They talk about having the right to choose who they associate with. That's fair enough. I don't see anybody in their right mind who would choose to associate with these creeps. These neo-Neanderthals need to stay in their indoor petting zoo because the right of association is a double-edged sword. Decent society, which these people don't qualify to be, also has the right to decide who it wants to associate with. And if these guys come outside of their all-white village, then society has the right to make sure that they know nobody wants to associate with them. And they need to stay in the toilet that they made. Make these creeps live by the rules that they demand. But we all know that they'll never do that because, as Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. If you're a black person who just so happens to find themselves near one of these all-white racialist enclave outposts, then you need to make sure that you're ready and willing to protect yourself. In last Friday's crime report, I showed you how this white man was shooting a rifle at a black man for jogging in his own neighborhood. This is a guy who was one of his neighbors, and that's what he did. Now, that's what they do when they live in the same area as black folks. What happens when you have a whole bunch of individuals like this living together and sitting around the campfire because they don't have electricity, telling each other how exceptional they are because they're white? What kind of thoughts do you think go through their empty heads then? What do you think is going to happen then? As usual, a few of them are going to want to test the boundaries and prove that they've got the absolute white supremacy powers of killing people with impunity. That train is never late either. If all these guys wanted was to have their little enclaves where they could look around and see nothing but white folks, they already have that now. This is the absolute slowest and lowest and worst way to go about trying to create some sort of all-white utopia. But then again, that's not what it's about. It's not about having a bunch of white neighbors. It's about being able to exercise violence without consequences, because that's where this is supposed to be going. Now, these are the same creeps who always talk about how proud they are to be Americans, waving the flag and such, America's the greatest country on earth, etc., etc. And yet, when they talk about what their idealized, fetishized, perfect era of American history is, it's over 150 years before the Declaration of Independence, before the ratification of the Constitution, before the creation of the United States. You see, in the 17th century, no white man had to worry about going to prison for harming a black person. That's the motivating factor for them. That's the part that actually animates these guys. The idea of we're not going to have any sort of legal restraints on what we want to do because we're going to have all of this area that we control. They're trying to go back in time and recreate an era when, as the Supreme Court put it, a black man had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. Well, these racist reprobates can't read or count, which is why they don't know how or what year it is. See, white power allows these racists to live in bubbles where reality isn't allowed to intrude. Everything from the places they live to the media they consume, all the way down to the entertainment they watch. And they can go their entire worthless lives without having to hear that they're ever wrong. If these no-goodniks want to live out some white supremacist fantasy, that's fine. Let them sit around telling themselves that they're building an all-white nation and that they're producing their Aryan playground. But if they get too far up their own behinds and call themselves threatening black people, they'll find that their little white nationalist experiment will become the subject of yet another bout of forced integration, only with two crucial differences this time. The folks who show up to integrate will only be showing up for a day, and secondly, they won't be showing up to be their neighbors. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Morris Bodden, Wali Bilal, Russell Richardson, Faith Speaks Life, and Jamel Howard. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.